Hi guys, thanks for joining me again. I'm going to show you in this tutorial how to make a loom out of cardboard. Now, I've personally never tried weaving on a cardboard loom before. I've never made one, I've never woven on one before, and I've been amazed at just how easy it was to make the loom, and secondly, how sturdy it was to weave on, considering I used really quite probably slightly too flimsy a bit of cardboard, but actually it really held up throughout the process of weaving. And it's a really nice option if you've never tried weaving before. It's a low to no cost way of trying this craft out to see if you like it before progressing on to maybe buying something a bit more sturdy. So I made in the tutorial this little piece of weaving here. So we'll go through various techniques, and from sort of adding in a fringe at the bottom through some plain weaving techniques, and then hanging your piece on a bit of driftwood or a stick. And as ever, I really hope you enjoy doing it, making your loom and weaving on it as much as I've enjoyed putting the tutorial together for you. I personally really struggled with weaving. I struggled throughout all stages of learning it. I'm dyslexic, and especially when it got more technical, when weaving got more technical for me, I really struggled with that. Know that what one person might find really, really easy, another person might find very difficult to get their head around it. I personally learned through repetitively doing something over and over again, but just know that no question is stupid. If you have any questions or any struggles at all, just message me or write in the comments below and I'll do my best to help you out. So happy weaving, guys, and I really look forward to seeing what you come up with. Before I talk you through the materials you're going to need to create this project, I'm going to introduce you to a bit of very basic weaving terminology. Now, this is the stage that we're all going to get to before we start weaving. So this is a loom that I made yesterday out of cardboard. As you can see, it's quite a basic structure, and it's got these little 1/4 of an inch slits along the top. It's worth bearing these in mind now, as they're going to be relevant in the materials section. So the tension threads that then go onto your loom, that you wind onto your loom, are called your warp threads, and they make up the main structure of your woven surface. The threads that you then weave from right to left and left to right, interlaced with the warp threads, are called your weft threads. Now, this is a shuttle that I made. A shuttle is a device for holding your weft yarn, and I made this out of really cardboard that's probably too flimsy, so you'd want to maybe glue two together, but it will probably do the job for one weaving. You just unwind enough yarn off your shuttle and use it to weave across the surface of the warp. So that's your shuttle. Now, this flat stick here, I've got a pickup stick, but you could just as well use a 30cm ruler or a really sturdy bit of card. You will want it to be quite sturdy, because as you're separating your warp threads here, it's putting it under quite a lot of tension. Now, it's called a pickup stick or a shed stick. It would be called a shed stick because this gap that's created is called the shed. And I found the origins of that word come from an Old English word meaning to set aside. I've been looking for it for quite a while, so I was pleased to find that out. The last thing I want to tell you about is the term an end. Now, I refer to an end quite a lot, and technically one end is one single warp thread, but I find a lot of people, and I'm guilty of this as well, refer to an end as just one thread of anything, so one weft thread or one warp thread. Materials you're going to need for completing this project are not necessarily a cutting mat, but I found a cutting mat and a Stanley knife were very useful for cutting out the cardboard loom. You could just as well, though, use a pair of scissors. Next thing you're going to need is a cardboard rectangle. You don't want it to be much smaller than this. It's erring a little bit on the thin side, this, but we'll just about get away with it. You wouldn't want the corrugated bit in the middle to be much bigger than that because it will start breaking. You could always glue two bits of cardboard together. You're going to want to measure it out to the nearest 1/4 of an inch because, like I mentioned in the terminology section before this, you're going to be measuring 1/4 of an inch slits all the way along the top and all the way along the bottom. Keep any offcuts of card because they're useful for making shuttles with and also for making a strip to go along the bottom of your weaving. You'll need a 30cm ruler that has 1/4 of an inch markings on it, a pencil, not essential but quite useful to have some tape. You'll need some warp yarn. Now I'm using a fairly sturdy string. You can use, if you don't have string, you can use pretty much anything. Just make sure it hasn't got too much give in it. You'll need a fork to beat your yarn down with, some tapestry needles or a tapestry needle to weave with, a selection of weft yarns. Now this one I got from Seeded in Southsea and it's a recycled cotton yarn. This is another recycled cotton yarn, I think officially a macrame yarn, but I found this at our local zero waste shop in Romsey, Lemon and Ginger. That's where I get my recyclable packaging tape from, and I just love it. It feels really nice, so we'll give that a go. And then I've got just some other yarn that I had lying around here. I've got some scrappy bits of pom-pom trimming. I've also got a few bits of fibre. If you don't have fibre, don't worry, it might be something you want to experiment with later on down the line, but I've got a few bits of that. And finally, I've got a stick, I've got a bit of driftwood, but you could get a stick out of the garden that you can hang your wall hanging on afterwards. You don't have to make a wall hanging. You could make something that lies flat on the table, but if you want to hang it, go and grab a stick. And the last thing, not essential, but very, very useful, is having a basket to put your warp yarn in while you're putting the warp onto your cardboard. It stops it from spinning around through chair legs. Before we get going, I'm going to quickly show you these little frame looms that are made by Loom. I use them to do all of my frame loom teaching on. They come in 4 different sizes. This one is the smallest one that Loom make. They're always in stock on my website, and I just like them because they're really nicely put together bits of kit. They very easily collapse back down into the box that they come in, and they've also got their own shuttle and a pickup stick in the box with them. The way you put the warp on is slightly different to how you put it onto the cardboard loom, but that is explained in the brochure that comes with it. So if you have decided that you'd rather not do cardboard weaving and make your own loom, just place an order on the Elka website and I can get one of these sent out to you really quickly. The first thing you're going to want to do is, taking your rectangle of cardboard, you're going to want to measure 1/2 inch all the way round the outside. And then just draw a border. You're then going to want to measure within your border here 1/4 inch markers all the way along the top and along the bottom of your cardboard loom. You're then just going to want to draw those lines right up to the top, right to the edge, so that you've got a guide for cutting your slits. Then taking your scissors, you want to cut just down to this line of the border, and you're just going to cut along every 1/4 inch mark. You're now ready to put your warp onto the loom. So what you'll need for that, this is where your basket comes in really handy. So either grab a basket or a bowl and unwind a bit of yarn off your spool of warp thread, and then take that and just pop it down on the floor next to you. And that way it stops your yarn from wiggling around all in between the table legs and chair legs. So we'll use this as the front of our loom and this as the back. You want a nice long tail to be hanging off the back, and you're just going to slide that first thread through that first slit up at the top of the loom, and you can see you've got a nice long tail there at the back. That's probably a little bit over the top, because what you're going to do once you've put all of your warp yarns all the way over, you're going to then tie the 2 loose ends together to secure them, but we'll leave it like that for now. And so you've brought it through that first slit up at the top there. You're going to bring it down and through that first slit on the bottom there. Now, instead of going round the back, you're just going to bring it round, up under and through that second slit there. Now be careful, because these little slits, if you're using thinner card like me, probably a little bit too thin, they have a tendency to flip up. So just support it as you're doing it. Unwind a little more yarn, and then you're going to come up, wiggle it through that slit at the top, bring it round the back and back through that slit there, and then down to the bottom, through, round the back, all the way up, through, round the back. I'm just coming up to the last thread here, into the last notch. And so I'm going to pop that through there and then turn the loom over onto its back. And you're going to cut another tail for the end there. And just tie those on the diagonal like that, in a double knot or a triple knot, depending on how slippy the yarn is that you've used to make your warp with. There we go, and you can just tidy up those loose ends there. Now, because I've used quite flimsy cardboard and these little notches are bending around all over the place, I'm going to use some of this tape. Any old sellotape will do. I just particularly like this recyclable stuff. And I'm just going to secure those there at both ends. Just a little bit of peace of mind while you're weaving. There we go. If you're really worried about how bendy they are, you could also put a line of tape over the top, but to be honest, using anything thinner than that is probably not going to work anyway. Next thing you're going to want to do is to take a few bits of your scrap cardboard from where you cut your main bit of loom out. I've cut, well, it's about the same sort of width as a 30cm ruler, and I'm going to weave this. This is going to be the base of your weaving, and I'm going to weave this over and under every single thread. So it doesn't matter with this whether you start by going over or under that first warp thread, but you need to make sure you don't skip one out. So a good way of checking that, I'm going to start by going over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under. A good way of checking whether you've missed one or two is I'm going to deliberately go over two here. And then when you look at the surface of your cardboard, you can see that gap is bigger than it should be. So just always keep an eye on the surface of that card. So I'll backtrack and just go over, under, over, under, over, under, all the way across. And I'm going to slide that down to the bottom of my loom. Now that cardboard strip has two purposes. It gives you a nice solid base for your first few lines of weaving, and it forces you to leave enough room down here to be able to tie knots in the end to finish off your weaving at the end, because it can be terribly frustrating if your weaving sort of creeps down the loom and you come to the end and you have to tie knots in tiny little pieces of string. That can be really frustrating. So I've made a pickup stick for this one because it's such a small loom that I've made. I don't want that pickup stick to take up loads of the warp space. So I've just made a really small strip of card, which actually, because it's quite small, I think will just about be strong enough to twist and take the tension of the threads. And I'm going to weave that through in the same way that I've done with this cardboard base, but in the opposite sequence of threads. So that one started off by going over the top of the first thread. So I'm going to start by going underneath the first warp thread here. So under, over, all the way across. And then you'll be able to see here that because it's quite a small piece of cardboard, it's strong enough to create that shed without the cardboard bending. You're now ready to start weaving. Now this is where your pickup stick first comes in handy. What this pickup stick allows you to do is pass your shuttle or your tapestry needle, whichever you decide to use, through the warp threads nice and easily, but it will only let you do this easy pass through one way. The other way, you have to weave it over and under. So what I'd suggest doing is using your weaker hand with your easy pass through. So I'm right-handed, so I'm going to start by passing my shuttle from left to right. So I'm going to pull the pickup stick down a little bit from the top, give it a good twist, so you're opening up your shed. Unwind enough yarn off your shuttle so that you can get it all the way through and leave a nice tail on the end. It's a very common mistake to make, is to not unwind enough yarn off your shuttle, and you'll pass it through and the whole shuttle will come through, leaving no yarn behind it. So just always make sure you unwind enough yarn off your shuttle. And I'm using a tapestry needle, but if you feel more comfortable, just thread the end of your yarn through a tapestry needle. And if you know you're going to do 4 rows of weaving, for example, just measure out 4 generous widths of your warp. So we'll start with the shuttle, and we're going to pass it from left to right and just pull that through, leaving a couple of inches hanging off the end there. Drop your pickup stick down. When it's not in use, slide it up to the top of the loom. Then taking your fork, you're going to beat that down towards the bottom of your loom. You can give a little pull. Now, with this loose end, you're going to tidy it away by weaving it in the opposite way to this row of weaving underneath. So that weft yarn is coming out underneath that last warp thread there. So I'm going to then weave it over, under, just a few times, and just pull it through so it's just sitting at the back there. And beat that down. And you'll find once you have a few rows of weaving on top of it, it'll trap it in place nicely. Just push that down so it's sitting behind those warp threads. Now, because you used your easy pass through that way, on the way back over, you're going to have to weave it over and under. So this warp thread here is sitting on top of the weft yarn. So I'm going to bring this weft yarn round and over the top of the warp yarn, under, over, and then you're going to weave that all the way back over to the other side of the warp, and then give it a pull through. What you want to do now is to just hang on to this loop on this side, and it doesn't have to be much, but to keep nice straight edges, you want to make sure that you don't pull your weft yarns tighter and tighter. It's very easy to do, and you'll end up with a wedge-shaped piece of weaving because everything gets tighter and tighter. So a good way of stopping that from happening, hang on to that little loop at the end, bring this yarn down in a sort of arc shape, and that helps keep a nice even tension over the surface of your weaving. So let's do a slightly more exaggerated arch like that, and then keep your eye on this loop at the edge here, because you'll see as soon as you start beating, that loop disappears, and then just beat from the middle out towards the edge. If you've got quite a big loop left on the end there, you can just adjust it and tighten that up. So on our third row of weaving, we're back on our easy pass through here. So you're going to bring your pickup stick down and twist it, and then you're going to pass your shuttle all the way through those warp threads, drop it down, push it to the top, create this nice arc. Now this is actually got a name, it's called bubbling. And if you had a much wider warp, you'd do multiple bubbles. But we've just got a little warp here, so we're going to just do one. And then make sure you leave your little loop at the edge there, and then beat it down to the bottom. Fourth row, we're going to just weave it all the way back over. And what I'm going to do now is show you how to do a rya knot. Pull that through. I'm going to show you how to create a fringe at the bottom of your woven piece. If you don't want to, don't do it. Just carry on practicing your plain weave. But I'll show you this technique now, and you can apply it if you'd like to. Just to come to the end of this colour here, we're going to cut it so there's a couple of inches on the end there, and then weave this back over and under a couple of times in the opposite way to the row of weaving underneath it. And then we'll just leave that sitting at the back of the warp threads like you did with the loose tail at the beginning, and just beat that down to the bottom there. So that's your first 4 lines of weaving. I'm going to show you now how to make a rye knot. Rye knots are used to create the fringing that you see at the bottom of some wall hangings. They don't necessarily have to be used at the bottom. You can use them within the body of your weaving, and then you can give them a little haircut and it makes them stand up on end. So they're just a really lovely way of creating texture within your piece. I'm going to use this lovely recycled cotton. I love the colour, and also because it's nice and chunky, so I'm going to use a couple of strands probably as one, and it'll give me a nice bushy fringe down there. So I'm going to unwind some, pop it down in my basket again on the floor, your basket or your bowl. And I find the easiest way of getting a good length fringe for this sort of size of hanging is to trap the end in between your thumb and your hand, and then wrap it round your elbow and then round your thumb there. If you're not sure quite how much you're going to need, do less, and then you can always add more. So I'm going to stop about there, and then you cut your thread off, and then with this bundle of threads you've got, cut them up at the top of the loop there, and then down at the bottom here. That's the loose one. Down at the bottom, and then you've got a nice bundle of threads to work with. To make a rye knot, I'm going to use 2 of these threads as though they're one thread. You could just use single threads, but I think that would make it just wouldn't be a thick enough fringe. So I'm going to take 2 threads out of my bundle, double them over, and taking the first 2 warp threads here and lifting them up slightly to separate them from the rest, I'm going to lie that doubled over yarn over in a U shape, an upside down U shape. And one side at a time. So I'm going to start with the right side. I'm going to take these threads, bring them round the back and up through the middle. I'm then going to take the left hand side and come round the back and up through the middle. I'll give them a little tug up to tighten them, and then slide them down to the bottom to sit on top of my row of weaving here. I'll show you another. I'm going to take the 2 threads, double them over. I'm then going to take my 3rd and my 4th here, warp threads, just separate them with your finger like that. And then I'm going to come round the back and up through the middle, and round the back and up through the middle, giving them a little tug up and then slide down to the bottom. If these little loose ends start popping out, you can just wiggle them back down towards the bottom there. So I've got to the end of my first row of rye knots here, and you'll see that there's just one odd one out on the end here, and that's absolutely fine. If I started weaving on top of this, you just wouldn't notice that random last thread on the end there. As it is, even with 2 threads doubled up as one, it's still quite a thin fringe. So I've decided I've cut some more of this recycled cotton, and I'm actually going to use 3 ends as one, and I'm going to do another row over the top. If you're doing a row on top, you're going to double it over again. You want then to overlap them. So with this first row, I used the first and second threads. With this second row, I'm going to use the second and third. Double that over, round the back and up through the middle, round the back and up through the middle. Little tug up to tighten it and then slide it down to the bottom. And then you're just going to carry on all the way to the end. And what you'll see on this last one that I'm doing here is that you're going to then incorporate that one that you had randomly left over on the end there with this second row. It'll be absorbed by that second row. Slide that down to the bottom. And so that is a much shaggier fringe. I'm happier with that. I think before I start weaving plain weave again, I'm going to add in a little row of pom-pom trimming at the bottom on top of the rya knots. The easiest way of adding this pom-pom trimming in, because it's really difficult to weave over and under, is to use your easy pass-through. So drop your pickup stick down, give it a twist, and then you can just sort of pass that through. It's still a bit of a fiddle, but you can sort of pass that through. And then you want to have it at least, you know, you want to have about an inch hanging off the end so that you can then, when you cut it off, you can tuck it round the back. And then you just need to find which warp threads the bobbles naturally pop up through to the surface. It might not be completely even. It's difficult to get it completely even with them, but just pick which ones and just pull them through and wiggle them down to the bottom like that. Much easier to do with your easy pass through. And then just cut it off, so you're sacrificing a bobble on the end there. You can cut that bobble off, because what you're going to do once it's off is tuck it round the back. Cut that one off as well. And you can either stitch it or you can find warp threads to tuck it behind at the end. I'm now ready to start doing a bit of plain weaving on top of this again. And what I'm going to do, this is quite a fine yarn and I want to weave a bit quicker. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to measure out, I think I probably want about 6 rows of this green above here. So because I'm going to double it over, I probably want around about 12 widths of my warp, and I'm going to make them a little generous to allow for the fact that it's weaving over and under. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And I'm just going to cut that off there. And I'm going to thread one end through and just get those ends even here. There we go. And so it's going to be double the thickness. And because you used your easy pass-through to put the pom-poms in, I'm going to start by weaving back over this way, and I'm going to start by coming, so this pink trim is coming out underneath, so I'm going to start by going over the top, over, under, over, under, over, under. And with the tapestry needle, because it's not as long as a shuttle, you might want to sort of bring it all the way through, remembering to leave a little tail on the end, and then start again. So under, over, under. There we go, all the way through. And then beat down with the fork. I just want to, I'm going to pull it through a little bit more. I just want to get rid of this loose end here as well as I go along. You might want to leave them to the end, but I like tidying them up as I go. And we're just going to weave that in the opposite way to how it was woven underneath. And then you sort of pull that through so it's sitting behind your warp threads there, and then you can give it a little beat down. Don't worry if they pop out, you can always tidy them up at the end. And so we're going back over the opposite way to the row of weaving below, and all the way through. And then just remembering your little loops at the end there. I've got in a bit of a tangle here. There we go. Just remembering to keep a little loop at the edge there to allow for the edges pulling in, and then weave that, push that down to the bottom there. Coming back over, you can use your easy pass through. So with the tapestry needle, again, it's a little easier with the shuttle, but with the tapestry needle, you can thread it all the way through that gap, your shed, leaving your little loop at the edge there. Drop your pickup stick down and slide it up to the top of the loom. Holding onto your little loop at the side there, bring it down in a bubble. And then taking your fork, you're going to beat from the centre out towards the edge. You're now back onto weaving it through with your tapestry needle. As you can see, I've just had enough yarn here to finish up that row. So I'm going to cut off the tapestry needle. And a good way, when the ends are really short like this, a good way of tidying them away is to weave without attaching them to the tapestry needle first, is to weave the tapestry needle where you want the yarn to go, and then push it through a bit and just thread those ends in at the last minute and just catch them on the way through. That's quite a good way of tidying them away without it being too much of a fiddle. And then you can just push them down. If you're changing colour a lot, I'd suggest starting and stopping on opposite sides. So when you start on this side, you'll have your loose ends on that side, because it obviously adds a little bit extra to your weaving. With something this size, it probably won't notice, but if you're weaving a bigger piece, you might want to put that into practice. I think I'm now going to add a little bit of fibre in. Like I said before, you don't have to have this fibre, you don't have to add it in. And what you could do as an alternative to using actual fibre would be to use, let me find them, use maybe your bundle of any leftover threads you've got from your Rya knots, or you could cut some separate ones and you can use them in the same way. I'm going to, again, like you did with the pom-pom trim, I'm going to use my easy pass through to get that fibre across. And the way that these fibres work, bundles of fibres like this are called rovings. And the way that you can use them, you can just tease them apart and just use little bits of them. I'm going to, I think I'll probably use sort of half of that bunch there. And you want to make sure that it's a bit wider than the width of your warp threads, because as you tease them through to the surface, it's obviously the width of them is going to get shorter. So I've sort of stretched them out a little bit, and then you can just poke them through I've got a nice narrow warp, so that's going to be quite easy. With longer ones, you might need to use a crochet hook or your tapestry needle. I've lost a bit there. I'll poke that through too. Let's get that through. And then I'll sort of pull it down there with my tapestry needle. And then I'm going to drop my pickup stick down and slide it up to the top of the loom. And I'm going to sort of tease bits through to the front of the warp. I'm going to have a bigger bit there. And then I'm going to hang on to that loop and just tease some other little bits through to the surface like that. But you can see it's disappearing quite quickly along the edge here. Pull that down. Might want to try and make that a little bit longer. I'm using quite a lot of it. Tease that through and through like that. And then you can sort of push it down with your tapestry needle. And then you're ready to weave another row on top of that. I'm going to use some of this naturally dyed linen to weave on top, and that will sandwich these fibres in place. I'm going to double it up like I did with the green, but I'm not going to measure this one out. I'm just going to wing it. And so there is some of this naturally, this is dyed with madder root, this linen, and it gives that lovely pink colour. It gives all sorts of shades, but I love this pink that it gives. And we've got some of this on our website still at the moment. That's naturally dyed by my mum. So where this fibre is coming out underneath, I'm going to start by going over the top. And you just want to be a little bit gentle with this next row, because that fibre isn't secured underneath as of yet. You just get, once that's trapped in, you can be a little less careful with it. So just pull that down and we'll tidy this loose end away. Over and under. Doesn't need to be many. And we'll keep that tucked in behind the warp threads there. So that's trapped all your fibres in place there. You'll find as you weave further up towards the top of your loom that this pickup stick might actually become more of a hindrance than a help. So at that point, and I actually, with weaving on this size, I don't use it quite as much, so I actually forgot about it for a while, and I've just been weaving backwards and forwards with a tapestry needle, which is absolutely fine. But as soon as it's more of a hindrance than a help, just take it out, and you'll find that you've got more flexibility with your threads to carry on weaving slightly further up your warp. What you want to bear in mind at this stage as well is that you want to be able to comfortably fit your header stick in if you're weaving a wall hanging, and you're going to be taking these loops off the top of the cardboard and just threading that stick through. So you want to make sure that there's enough room left at the top to do that. If you've got a knobble on your stick, obviously the loop left at the top needs to be as big as that, the size of that knobble. I've actually just thought that I might want to add just one more layer of pom-poms in there, so I'm going to pop my pickup stick back in and I just need to weave it so it's going to be opening up the opposite way to that row of weaving underneath. So you can get, it's getting more of a fiddle towards the top. It's actually going to be, I think, probably a little bit tricky getting it through, but still I think easier than weaving it through those warp threads, or not. Hang on, let's see. Just got to sort of pass it through with your fingers, maybe just under a couple of warp threads at a time. All sorts of other stuff tangled up in here. And then flip those bobbles round so that they're coming up through the surface, up this way. I've lost one. Let's get that. Those last few. One through there. That will do. Now I've come to the end of this last colour that I'm going to do. I think I could probably do a little bit more, but I'm running out of time before Frankie wakes up, so I'm going to show you how to take it off the loom from where it is now. So with this last row I've come across and I've just got enough, and instead of tidying it away above, I'm just going to tidy it away underneath that last row, just to help trap it in place and to stop it from riding up too much. There are other ways of finishing off, but I'm going to save them for another video, because I think this is, if you haven't woven before, this is quite enough to take in one session. But there is something called the twisted header that you can put in at the beginning and at the end, but I'm going to do a separate video for that. So to begin with, we're going to start off by finishing off the bottom. So we'll just move tools and things out of the way, and we're going to flip our fringing up over the top and simply pull out your cardboard base at the bottom here. And then what you're going to do is remove this tape from the back, which was just helping keep everything in one place while you were weaving. If we're careful, we'll be able to use this loom again. And we're going to tie knots all the way along here. So what we want to do is just cut the back here. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do this without ruining the, oh no, maybe. Because it would be not, it's nice if you've gone to the effort of making it to be able to use it again. Obviously, if you like weaving, it's worth investing in a slightly more solid structure. Right, so we're there, and then we'll just cut this diagonal tie at the back. I'm going to flip it back over to the front, and then we are literally going to, you can actually, you could do them in pairs, but I'm going to do them in singles and just tie a nice double knot, and then do that, and you can tidy up the threads as you go along. Tie knots all the way along, and that just secures all your threads along the bottom. Don't pull it too tight or you'll end up rucking the weaving up, but you want a nice firm double knot that's not going to come undone. So you're going to do that all the way along the bottom. Coming up to the end here, and we've got 3 left over, so all I'm going to do with those, I've got this very long loose end here as well, we'll leave that attached for now, is just tie 2 together with the 1 like that. And you're not going to see any of this knotting anyway because it's hidden under your fringe. So that's your bottom bit taken care of. I'm now going to just show you how to take care of these bits hanging out at the edge. Some people like them hanging out at the edge. I do, especially with the rovings, quite like them, especially if you've got lots of them. They can look really great hanging down the outside. But with these bits of pom-pom trimming, they've got quite blunt ends on them. So it's easiest to deal with them while these threads are still stuck in the cardboard loom at the top. So with these, you've probably got, you could just tidy any really long loose bits at the back now. You could just trim them a bit shorter or weave them in a little bit more with a tapestry needle. I'm going to trim them just to save a bit of time. And then, like I showed you before, there's probably enough of a warp thread there to be able to poke your tapestry needle through and just catch that on the way past, and then just pull it through the back like that. Might need a bit of a wiggle. There we go. And that will just tidy it away enough at the back to trap it in place. An alternative would be to just fold them back and just put a little stitch in the back with just normal cotton yarn. I say yarn, I mean thread, sort of sewing machine thread. We'll just catch that one on the way through and pull it through like that. And we'll do the same down at the bottom here. That's why it's worth leaving a slightly longer bit hanging off the edge, so you've got that option of pulling it through like that. And with those, like I said, you can either leave them hanging down or you can find any old loop at the back to thread them through and just tidy those loose edges away like that. There we go. It's now time to thread our header through, and so you're going to want to take this tape off the back if you added it on. And we want to be careful with this end loop here. I think we'll probably end up stitching that. We'll take that out for now, and what we'll do is we'll stitch it over the last one and we'll thread it down behind at the end. And so we're just going to, probably from this side here, pull off those loops. And like I said, if you want to save your loom for another go, you want to do it quite carefully. I've used quite flimsy cardboard for mine, so I have to be extra careful. so I can keep that for another time. Pull that weaving down, and then you're just going to slide your header stick through the loops. And try and twist them all the same way. So I'm giving mine a little counterclockwise twist. Let's shimmy those along, and then we've got this loose end here, which we can either loop it over and stitch it down there, or we could just lose it completely, but I think actually it will be better if it's looped over. So what we'll do is we'll loop it over. I'll just cut that knot off the end of it, thread it through a tapestry needle, and then you can sort of weave it over and under down the back here, just to lose it. And the other loops over the top will take the weight of it. There we go, like that. And we can tidy that loose end right there. You can also then give your fringe a little trim. I've got a ridiculously long one here, so you might want to lift it up and give it a little shake and a comb. I find fringes are easiest to cut on the wall, but I'm going to use, while I've got it on the cutting mat here, I'm going to use that to just give it a bit of a haircut, because it is very long. That's made it slightly, it's probably very wonky, it is very wonky, but you get the idea. So I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. As ever, let me know how you have got on. I'm really enjoying seeing all your pictures of your creations that you've been sending me, and I'll do some follow-up tutorials on various different techniques, and I'll certainly do some on my Luo frame loom that I've got there. But anyway, happy weaving, guys.